Whispering winds roam through the dead trees. Dust piles up on the deserted beds. Vines creep through the windows and through the gates. All around is a ghost town, full of forgotten souls and a tarnished past. Boarded-up buildings and overgrown fields occupy the Medfield State Hospital. Today, it has been transformed into a walking path complete with a canoe ramp, park, and wetlands. The town tried to repurpose the land which was once home to over 2,000 patients who lived and died here. William Pitt Wentworth began development in the late 17th century. It was created to relieve the overflow of patients at other state facilities. Upon its opening, it was Massachusetts' first facility for dealing with chronic mental patients. The complex is composed of 58 buildings, and at one time it housed its own livestock, gardens, and operated its own power. The Medfield State Hospital started as the Medfield Insane Asylum and was unique because it was not the typical Kirkbride layout, instead a cottage style to ensure ventilation throughout the buildings. The thought was that fresh air could cure illnesses. Pitt aimed to make the patients feel at home, so all of the bedrooms were on the second floor and the work and sitting areas were located on the first. The grounds are laid out like a mirror image, with the men's wing on the west side and the women's wing on the east side. There were infirmaries, quiet rooms, workshops, and excited and convulsive wards.
Hi, I'm John Thompson. I'm the grounds chairman for Medfield State Hospital. Behind me is what's known as the infirmary building. This building was constructed in 1915, so it's about 100 years old, and it was built because so many patients were sick at the hospital that they needed a place to have a pathology lab and also to perform autopsies and certain surgeries. This building had a full surgical center on the first floor, a pathology lab in the basement, and it had a recovery center on the second floor. In the early days of the hospital, before 1915, when this building was built, the pathologist and medical examiner had to come out when people died and do the autopsies here, and it caused a lot of commuting. And so they asked the legislature for money to build an on-site pathology lab and surgical center. More than 40 autopsies a year were performed in this building. It was also the place where dentistry was done. And between 1910 and probably the 1930s, I've read one record that over 2,000 teeth were pulled in dental work in this building. It's very hard for them to keep dentists because of the amount of work that they had with the amount of dental work that patients needed and the care that they needed. But this is the building where the dentistry, the pathology, and the autopsies were performed.
The R building was located in the back. It was home to violent psychotics and was high security. A patient named Blake resided here after killing his whole family and urged the state to give him recreational activities. Thus, the basketball hoop and benches were constructed in this area. The S ward for excited patients was for those with old age diseases. It was once said that once you were admitted, you never left. The B1 unit was for electric shock. Dining halls, bakery, butcher shop, and chapel are in the center. The chapel was named after Dr. Lee, who was praised for his STEP program, which allowed patients to work jobs and become acclimated to society until they were released. The hospital stretched from the opening stone gate to the superintendent's house and management/workers' cottages to patients. When it was functioning, 630 acres housed more than 800 doctors, nurses, and psychiatric workers that helped on the grounds. The majority of patients were between the age of 30 and 50. 60% of the patients did not even have a mental disease, instead dementia that resulted from old age.
Some of the patients, of course, wanted to be out. They let us look at some of the records of the state hospital in the past, and some of them were scary as heck. People with seizure disorders were there, people with tic douloureux were there, people with other things. Of course, certainly a lot of them were mentally ill, but not all of them. And then they also had let us look at those records, and it was really scary. One that really bothered us the most was a man who, it looked like he was trying to get rid of his wife. And she had a horrible temper. So he got her really angry one day and he took her to the doctor and said she's mentally ill. So she didn't calm down fast enough and she was put in the hospital temporarily. And then periodically she'd try to get out and he'd say something or send somebody to do something and get her inflamed again. And she ended up there for over 20 years and ended up dying. And I think she probably was mentally handicapped by the time that she got out.
The hospital first opened in hopes that there would only be 1,000 patients. However, by 1910, there were over 1,500. During the beginning stages of its life, the hospital saw an average of 4 deaths per week. Patient abuse was also prominent, from everything ranging from beatings to shock treatment. Here with me, I have a New York Times article from September 14, 1902. Word was received here today that Sarah McCormick, a Lowell woman, 30 years of age, whose parents reside in the city, an inmate of the Medfield Insane Asylum, was killed at that institution, at this building, by a sister inmate on Thursday morning during the temporary absence of their attendant. Both women were inmates of the ward for violent patients, and when the attendant left the room for a moment, the McCormick woman was strapped to her bed while the other patient was engaged in cleaning the floor. In this work, she used a heavy iron polisher, and it was with this weapon that she attacked her victim, who was powerless to offer the slightest defense. When the nurse returned, the McCormick woman was dead. Psychotropic drugs were introduced to the asylum in the 50s. This changed the care of the patients. The drugs allowed more patients to be discharged. An average of 100 people a year went back to their daily lives, and 200 people died on the property each year. Due to the increase of deaths on the property around the turn of the century, the town did not allow any more patients to be buried in the town cemetery. The hospital then built their own cemetery in 1918 when a deadly flu swept through. The last burial was in 1983. 841 people were buried in the Medfield State Hospital Cemetery, most in mass graves, and another 521 were in town. The hospital has also had a rich history of use of the grounds. It has been named a gold location, and 2 major motion pictures have been filmed here, both Shutter Island and The Box.
This is a significant view because this was one of the scenes in Shutter Island was made behind me in the chapel or against the chapel. I believe it's the last scene in the movie. They put a false stairway on the side of the building behind me, and Leonardo DiCaprio walks down this long cement walk path to awaiting cars. So the chapel was built in 1896. It has stained glass windows, which we've covered up to protect them from the elements and also from vandalism. The town hopes to keep this chapel under any circumstance for rebuilding the property.
In November of 2014, the town of Medfield bought the property for $3.1 million. They bought 136 acres of the campus, which included 12 acres of fields as well. The town has put the utmost effort in regenerating the grounds by boarding up all of the windows and cutting down excess trees to deter people from hiding in the bushes. By 1980, the town had decided that the hospital would be closed in the coming years. January 21st, 1994 was the last day that the Medfield State Hospital opened its doors to patients. Fast forward 20 some odd years later, and this is all that remains. Nothing more than abandoned buildings and lost souls, wandering the discarded streets.